So you all know Mr. Ta-Nehisi Coates here with us. So let's see. We'll get the show on the road. I'm going to say a brief word of introduction and just begin by recognizing and thanking the Dean, General Jebb, Vice Dean Rachel Sondheimer, Colonel Harper, and Dr. Isles and Major Caldwell for, in addition to Mr. Coates, making all this possible. It's really a historic event for the Writing Fellows program, and all of us are thrilled to be here. Above all, we want to thank you 14 cadets. You guys are here representing the Writing Fellows program. So this program was established in 2012. The idea of it was to provide our most promising cadet writers with opportunities and support for honing their craft, and also put you in a position to help your fellows in the Corps. So nearly all of you are Cadet Writing Fellows, or soon will be. I'm looking at you, the two plebes, Maxwell and Lauren, in the front. And all of them are eager, serious, imaginative readers of your work, and also invested, right, in the craft of writing for your own lives and work. So, now I don't know much of an introduction. I don't know that much of one is in order for this audience. Every one of the 29 of us in the room are thrilled to be here and know why we're here. But I'm going to read the facts briefly. Ta-Nehisi Coates is one of the great writers of our time, fact one. The next facts, right, national correspondent. Maybe that's not the way he would put it. It's fact number one. National correspondent at The Atlantic. His most recent best-selling book is We Were 8 Years in Power, 2017. That's a collection of essays, reporting, and reflections from the years of the Obama presidency. And this collection comes in the wake of earlier groundbreaking books, Memoirs of a Beautiful Struggle, 2008, and Between the World and Me, 2015, which of course won the National Book Award, and in part inspired the Zengerle Lecture that you gave just here last April. He's also a graphic novelist who's authoring for Marvel, the Black Panther series, and starting soon Captain America. And then many, many other things I think are underway. So it's our great honor, our great good fortune to welcome Ta-Nehisi Coates back to West Point this morning. Thank you for being here. So the plan this morning is to have a conversation about writing, process, audience, purpose, style, those sorts of things. And we'll start out talking for just a few minutes, and then the cadets are going to introduce themselves and join in, and we'll just keep talking till 11:30 and see where things go. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. So you talked a lot. I mean, one of the things for a long time that you've been consistent about in talking about writing is talking about it in terms of struggle, right, and difficulty. Failure is the word that starts, the most recent book. And when in that book, you turn to young writers. You have this moment where he turns to young writers, right, and he says something to the effect, your writer heroes are not mystics nor sorcerers. And then it goes on, right? They're humans practiced at the work of typing and revising and often agonized by it. Can you elaborate or give these young writers just some examples of what that's meant to you?
Yeah, it's funny. I teach a writing class down in New York, NYU, and one of the hardest things is to, let's back up. I just reread for the second time E.L. Doctorow's Billy Bathgate. And you guys read Doctorow? You guys should all read Doctorow. Oh, man. You can either read Ragtime, Billy Bathgate, all that stuff is good. Waterworks. Billy Bathgate is just this exceptional. It's a gangster story, but it's the most literary, beautiful gangster story you ever want to read. And I had to reread it for something that I was writing. And great writing, when it's achieving at a high level, or great art, great athletics, anything, what happens is the person casts a spell on you. It's an illusion. And everything just looks easy. They look like they're not trying at all. And if you're a writer, and I'm 42 years old, I've been writing professionally for 22 years. And I read that, and I just need to quit now. You know, I was reading this, I said, sorry. I can be a little long-winded. This is actually important. I'm just gonna read the first sentence, okay? Because I saw the first sentence and I was like, nope, I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I mean, I can be a reader. I clearly cannot be, you know, a writer. He had to have planned it because when we drove to the dock, the boat was there and the engine was running and you could see the water churning up phosphorescence in the river, which was the only light there was because there was no moon, nor no electric light either in the shack where the dockmaster should have been sitting, nor on the boat itself, and certainly not from the car. Yet everyone knew where everyone was. And when the big Packard came down the ramp, Mickey the driver braked it so that the wheels hardly rattled the boards. And when he pulled up alongside the gangway, the doors were already open, and they hustled Bo and the girl upside before they even made a shadow in all that darkness. That's one sentence. And I looked at that. And if you read the sentence, I mean, I know that's a lot and you would think it's a run-on, but if you read the sentence, you're never, ever confused. It's actually quite a beautiful sentence. And I read that and I can't write, I can't do this. I can't do this. And anytime you behold something great or somebody really doing it at the top level that you really admire, the first feeling is there's no way, it must be something in their bones that allows them to do this that I clearly do not have. And what derives from that is the feeling that this person just sort of sat down, and we're talking about writing in this case, but you know, whatever. This person just sat down at the keyboard and bam, they just wrote that sentence. Because that's how it appears to you, right? I mean, you see it in a book and it's there. What is not there is all the red pen marks. What's not there is all the, you know, scratch outs. What's not there is all the earlier versions of what that sentence actually looks like. All you see is the final version. And so a lot of times what young writers will try to do is they'll have a picture in their head that maybe sounds like something like that sentence, whatever particular beauty strikes you. They'll sit down at the keyboard and they'll try to write that beautiful thing that they hear. And it just doesn't come out anything like that at all. In fact, it usually comes out pretty terrible. And this causes the young writer, or the writer period, you know, if you don't adjust to it, but the young writer to then, you know, throw up their hands, you know, go have a beer and talk about how they have writer's block. Because it's not coming out the way they want it to come out. But what people don't understand, writing is more than, if this makes sense, more than writing is written, it's built. So the way I talk about it is like, I have an idea, I want to write about something. First few sentences I write about that are almost always terrible, terrible sentences. Or the first page, or the first couple of pages. It's generally really, really bad. And what I have to do constantly is talk to myself and say, it's okay, Ta-Nehisi, it's all right. And you go to bed and you sleep on it, and you wake up the next day and you look and you say, well, it might be something good in here, something I, you know, actually can use. And so you rewrite. And then it goes from absolutely terrible to merely bad. That's progress. Go to bed the next day. Come back to your bad draft. You say, I think there might be, you know, I can, peel this back. I can take this word out. I can add this, da. You tinker with your draft a little bit more. And you get from bad to like, okay. And then you do it the next day, and you might actually even start feeling good. But the point is, it doesn't happen magically. It's all math. There's no magic in this world. It's all math. It's like just the math is supposed to make it appear to be magic. That's the trick. This is true of anything. I mean, you know, you watch, LeBron James, make a great shot, but you don't see him, shooting 1,000 jump shots a day. That's not what you see. You just see the shot. And you assume, well, there's no way I could ever, do anything like that, or any other human could actually do like that. You don't see the person actually working at it. I was watching Beyonce at Coachella this weekend. I only got the last half. And I was like, man, watching her actually exhausts me. Like, I'm exhausted watching her. And I was exhausted because, I mean, the amount of practice to be able to move like that and sing like that at the same time is ridiculous. But when it's done at a high level, it should almost appear like completely natural. So the thing the young writer has to just remember is like, all these people you admire write poorly. All of them. All of them. They all start off writing poorly. The difference between you and them, more than anything else, is A, they've been writing poorly longer, so they're more used to the fact of writing poorly, because it's the writing poorly that really kills you, because you put it down and say, I can't do this. You know what I mean? But it's also the fact that they understand the process. They know they'll get better and better and better and better and better and better and better. And they've been revising for like years. Like they've been done the process of revision for years. And so by that time, they're kind of used to it. They understand it. But the mistake is to believe that when you sit down, like there's fairy dust that comes from the clouds and blesses you, and you get this thing called inspiration and it flows through your fingers. It never happens. It's agonizing. And when it stops being agonizing, you should go do something else.
You mentioned in there at one point, you get to the point, beyond mediocrity to adequacy, and then it feels good, right? It feels good at some point. One of the things I think, that we've talked about this recently in discussions, right? There's a lot of questioning in your work of hope, right? Of optimism, of nostalgia, sentiment, and all of that. How do you trust those good feelings, like when they get there as a writer, or what helps you to trust them, or know, okay, there's a little less agony now, or I can feel good about that?
Well, I just had a friend of mine just told me this, and I think like much more important in my work is like these poles of joy and sorrow, which I think, flows all the way through it. When I am at the place where I feel like I have done the best job I possibly can translating what's in my head, and whatever beauty I see in my head onto the page, that's when I stop. That's when I stop. And that doesn't mean I've necessarily, done a satisfactory job. That doesn't mean that I feel like I, did it as well as I wanted to do it. But, there's a point, where you just say, okay, I've done the best I can here. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that your response made me think of, you're so giving in terms of your citations, right? You wear on your sleeve, read this person, that person, the other. When we just now were in my office, you went straight to the bookshelves, right? And are sort of looking through them, right? And like this person, you make it overt, right? There's no obscuring anything. There's no saying, this dream, the dream of whiteness is original to Baldwin, right? You don't make any bones about that. And this is a culture in many ways, or many ways we find American culture to be something that privileges novelty, right? Newness, like what's the next thing technologically? What haven't we seen before? And when you talked about writing that book, you said, no, original and old. I want to write something original. Could you say a little bit more about?
I mean, I like old things in general.
Yeah.
It was funny. I was looking through that Circles essay, and I was looking at how Emerson, nobody writes like that anymore. Like that's considered pretentious, but I love that sort of romantic style, of writing. I don't know. I think it has to do with my love of history. I love history. And I guess I'm also skeptical of the ability in literature to reinvent. I don't know that they're like new stories or new themes or anything. I mean, there's, a new lens, which is the writer, doing what they do. But I'm probably a little skeptical of that. I think in my writing structurally and how I think about writing, I'm actually probably pretty conservative. I hew to really pretty, mainstream laws of writing. verbs over adjectives, that sort of stuff, strong sentences, all of that, So I don't know. It's weird because the writing, is, I guess, pretty radical, but the aesthetics I don't think are, and my notions, I don't think are. In terms of the citations, I just feel like you should give credit where credit is due. That's just a golden rule sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, it places you in connection too, as you say. I mean, in a history, right? You are sort of embedding in tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's something I didn't want to sit up here alone. I mean, you're part of something, and it gives me great joy to be part of something.
Yeah. I was thinking also. I mean, I was reading. I've been trying to get through some of the graphic novels, right? Because that wasn't something I had growing up. But the way the second one ends, the Black Panther comic, right? T'Challa rescues Shuri from the land of the living dead, and I think it ends by saying something like, "She's like, I've discovered nothing, but I remember everything, right? Or I remember everything." So it seems like that memory or that connection, it comes through very powerfully as we were looking at the work. So I want to ask you a little bit about style, then probably open it up to cadets. As we were just talking, Kendrick Lamar won the Pulitzer.
Why y'all snicker?
So he won the Pulitzer, and you talk about listening repeatedly to him is a mix of old and new, right? When you're writing Between the World and Me, and I thought if you're willing, we'd have you read a passage from here where you talk about writing, and I guess its origins in hip hop. For you, I think I marked it there near the bottom to the next page.
From hip-hop, I drew my earliest sense of what writing should mean. Grammar was never the point. Grammar was for the schoolmen and their television dreams. Out here in the concrete and the real, sentences should be supernatural. Words strung together until they compelled any listener to repeat them at odd hours long after the bass line had died. And these sentences, or bars, linked together into verses, should have a shading and mood that reflected their origins in slavery and struggle. The sentence might be magical, but the magic was never sentimental. It was born from the want of all that exceeded the slave's grasp and the exploration of all that divided the grasp from its desire.
So when I was reading, that passage just seemed to bring up so much, right? Your writing is not just prose. It's listening to music, it's the relationship to sentiment, the relationship to historical fact. And as I thought about it, I was like, I don't know what question to ask. But I was interested to have you read it and maybe talk a little bit about your relationship, what helps you as a writer when it's a very solitary thing. There are forms of collaboration with people who are there and not, with the dead. Collaboration with the dead. So I guess it's getting at that question. How do you?
Well, aesthetically, I tend to be pretty omnivorous. I don't have a high or low culture sort of thing. First place I heard really, really, really beautiful sentences was in hip hop. That just, I was born in '75, so Rakim probably came out in '87, so I was 12 years old, so that's right about the point where I would have started reading really serious books. And he used words in this just beautiful way that I had never heard anybody, because of my age, use, period, and certainly not in music. And so as a young person, I was like, I want to do that. I want to be that person. And then it progressively, the art form became more and more, literary. And I just, I wasn't too successful doing that at all. But I don't, but the aesthetics of it never left me. You know what I mean? Like you're a thing. I have a buddy who's a writer, and she says that every writer actually is something else. And that's the basis from which they, draw their style as a writer. And so for me, that would be hip hop, That was the first place. All of these sort of laws that I think about now, for instance, huge in writing is this idea of efficiency, okay? Every sentence You want every word to count. You want to have as much power as it possibly can. You want it to be aggressive. You want it to be strong. You don't want lazy, passive, just taking up space sentences. And the rappers were the first people I heard make sentences like that were these strong, really aggressive sentences. They were the first people, because of the way the rhythm works, you don't have much space. And so they were the first people who, like for me, to utilize that conceit in poetry, which is, this notion of as few words as possible, as much impact as possible at the same time. As much bang for your buck, because I got to stay on beat. I can't just ramble and say whatever. That was the first time I heard that. And, that shaped me such that, when I went on to read like, Doctorow, Edith Wharton, George Eliot, all of these other sort of canonical writers, Melville. I love Moby Dick. Gatsby, love Gatsby. I heard it, if this makes sense, or saw it, I guess, through the lens of hip hop. Like, they all sounded like rappers to me, all of them, every single one. Largely because what they were doing was not very different from the same thing that, Nas was doing, or what Kendrick does now. It actually, like, the basic rules of writing are not that different.
Thank you. That's a great segue, because I think the cadets, have, things that have influenced them as writers. So we'll just open it up, I think, and see what questions you guys have. Maybe quickly, it's okay that the mic doesn't capture it, I think. You just hold on to the mic if you're gonna ask first question, but just go ahead, your name and year, if you would, just so you can start connecting faces and names. We'll start at the back. So, Tyson?
I'm Seamus Malik, I'm class of 2018.
I'm Peter Zhu, class of 19.
I'm Kate Campbell from class of 2019.
Danny Nguyen, class of 2018.
Gabe Ban, class of 2018.
Felipe Sanchez, class of 2020.
Louis Warbeck, class of 2018.
Matthew Arnold, class of 2020.
Gabrielle Alford, class of 2019.
Alex Stone, class of 2020.
Lauren Clark, class of 2021.
Maxwell Myers, class of 2021.
All right. So, do you want to ask the? Oh, sorry, Celine.
Celine Gunderman, class of 2019.
So, sir, a question that has been plaguing my mind ever since I picked up Between the World and Me last year had to deal with how you are able to kind of capture in your audience feelings that they didn't necessarily take into account before. And by that I mean you're able to bring to different audiences, varying audiences based off their either racial background or socioeconomic background, a new perspective that they never had the chance to capture. So whenever you're in the writing process, do you take into account how your audience is going to end up capturing your writing? Or do you not so much think about the audience and just think about the words that you want to portray on the paper?
I think about the audience in terms of, am I being clear? Am I writing as clearly as I possibly can? Am I, writing in such a way that people can see? I don't think too much beyond that, though. I don't. Between the World to me is as much a shock to me as it probably is to you. I didn't write that book to touch a lot of people. I wrote it, because my friend had gotten killed and I had been processing it for years. That was the impulse. It's an interesting thing, though, to be in this position, because I'm hesitant to derive theories, from wherever that book went. But I do think that any sort of work that's going to touch a broad swath of people, paradoxically, and it's going to touch them in a deep sort of way, paradoxically, has to begin as a selfish work. You have to, and it actually makes sense if you think about it, right? Like, if you accept the baseline that we are all human beings, all equal, right? then somewhere within you, what really, really rings true probably rings true for a lot of other people. I'm talking about the deep, deep sort of thing. Your friend got killed by somebody who he pays taxes to protect him. Basic. Basic. Everybody can actually get that. Now they might, debate back and forth what that meant, but it's a pretty basic sentiment, and then everything flows out, from that. I find, that, the work of actually trying to, I don't know that writers should try to touch broad groups of people. I guess it'd be nice, but I think the primary mission and the actual difficult thing is to find out what you think yourself. That's always the hardest thing. I go through it in class with my kids all the time. Yes, but what do you think? What do you actually truly, truly think? What do you really, really, really want to say? A lot of times we don't know. I rewrote Between the World and Me 3-4 times before I figured it out. So I think actually paradoxically it starts interior. And that doesn't mean, you necessarily will get, to the exterior. In other words, to touch, broad swaths of people. But I don't think you have any hope if you don't start with the interior.
Mr. Coates, one of the things that really strikes me about your work is how much emotion goes into it. How much of your identity I can always see in that. And one of the things that I've always wondered is, talking about the struggle of writing. Is there a particular struggle that goes into putting that sort of raw identity on paper for the whole world to see, to talk about, to look at? And, how do you deal with that?
No, actually, it's pretty cathartic. It'd be worse if I couldn't do anything, which was probably the case for the first 20 years of my life. But you would feel these things and you would just sit. Going back to Between the World and Me, after Prince got killed, it just was so little I could do and say. And I just thought about him every day, and there was nothing I could do. And it was such a relief to write that book and get it out. The stress is the everyday. It's not the privilege of being able to translate it into writing. It's just that it's a privilege. That's the fun part. In this world as it is right now, I would not want to be. I would not wish myself in any other position than I'm in right now. It's a huge, huge privilege and a huge, huge relief. So that's the least struggling part of writing.
So, sir, I kind of feel that in the idea of truth-telling and sort of the avenue of social justice strikes me as being very dichotomous. The message fundamentally will make some people uncomfortable. I recall the question about your thoughts on the 9/11 first responders at the Zengerle lecture. But on the other hand, there's this goal of sort of persuasion and sort of opening up people's minds to your experience and to sort of really change their fundamental assumptions about the world around them. So my question is, how do you sort of reconcile these two forces that sort of seem at odds with each other when you write?
So it's two things. I think I'm not as uncomfortable as one might think. I always know what I wrote. Always. I'm not, you get people, sometimes they write books and then they go and do the interview and it's like, well, that's not quite, no, I knew what I wrote. And I thought about it a lot and I rewrote it several times. And I think probably the key to that is I don't know that I'm trying to persuade. I'm trying to illuminate, trying to clarify. I'm trying to exhibit, as clearly as I possibly can, the perspective I'm coming from or whatever I don't need, you take that question, for instance, I don't need my audience, because I've been asked about it quite a few times, I don't need my audience to accept my reasoning. But I need to be able to, my own standard, satisfactorily explain it. So if you ask me that question, I'm up there stumbling and bumbling and I can't quite get, now I have a problem. But as long as I can say, listen, this is what was going on. You know what I mean? I can say it clearly, I can say it strongly without, you know, as I said, stuttering and stammering, or you know what I mean, talking about things being taken out of context or whatever. As long as I can stay, I'm generally okay. I'm generally okay. You're right in the tension. And I think particularly for African-American writers or for folks who come any sort of, you know, marginal experience, the notion long has been, in order to talk to the masses of this country, what you have to do is write in such a way as though, you know, you're hand-holding them. So you can't tell them too much, you can't be too aggressive. It's like you're talking to little Johnny, I'm from this place called West Baltimore, you know, and it's not the nicest place in America, and there's some things that happen, but I love you, little Johnny, and you know, no, I'm not doing that, man. I'm gonna write because the writing I love doesn't do that. Nobody's holding my hand, man. You know, if I go to, I always say, if I go see, say, a lecture, you know, on the LGBTQ experience in America, I don't want people holding my hand as a straight dude. Tell me what you got to say. Tell me how you feel. Tell me what you're angry about. Tell me what, you know, pisses you off. You know, don't like be, you know, halfway speaking because you're thinking, you know, you're going to try to convince me, because actually, honestly, that's not true convincing anyway. You know, I understand, and I mean this, like, this is not a slight. I understand why our politics demands that. So I understand if you're running for Senate, House of Representative, mayor, governor, president. I understand why you can't speak like I speak. I got that. But that's why I'm not a politician. That's why I became a writer. If I'm a writer and I end up writing like a politician, I kind of have already lost. I don't know what I became a writer for. I became a writer so that I could talk the way I talk, so that I could tell you when 9/11 happened exactly how I felt. I can't, again, this goes back to the previous question. I can't tell you how liberating it feels to be able to do that. Because so much of being black in this country is having to contort yourself and having to not say what you feel and having to hide and having to phrase and do this. And the best thing about being a writer for me is I don't have to do none of that. I tell you straight up how I feel, you know, and people can like it or not like it. I mean, you know what I mean? It can be convincing or it can not be convincing. And I don't mean that in like, I'm never, you know, disrespectful. I'm never spiteful. I'm not mean. But how I feel is how I feel. What I see is what I see. You know, so I kind of let go of the notion of convincing. I don't think that's up to me. You know, my job is to write as clearly, as aggressively, as directly, and as honestly as I possibly can.
Sir, I have a question. Earlier we talked about citations and, you know, not wanting to feel alone and being with other writers. And I know in one of my first classes here, Literary Methodologies, we talk about your book also in conjunction with James Baldwin. Mm-hmm. And even in some of the criticism I've read, people have called you the new James Baldwin. For you, do you feel like that enriches your identity as an author, or do you think that limits your identity?
I appreciated it coming from Toni Morrison.
Yes.
Specifically Toni Morrison. I very much appreciated that comment coming from Toni Morrison, who actually knew James Baldwin, right? Like, so it's a different, yeah, it's a totally different context. And I should be honest, I generally take it as a compliment. I mean, how can I be mad at that? You know what I mean? And I don't think, here's what's gonna happen. Either I'm gonna write some more, you know, books, articles, etc., that, you know, will have impact and I'll live up to that, or I'll flame out and I won't. You know? So I actually think what people say about me, and, you know, and I mean even the good things, I don't mean the bad things, I actually do mean the good things. I think that's probably much less important than the work I do. It's up to me, you know, and if I do it right, you know, and I'm lucky and I'm 80, 85, you know, years old, and, you know, I have a body of work that's respectable, that's decent, and people say, well, yeah, I guess he was. I guess he was, and then maybe I'll be lucky enough for some kid to come along and they'll say he's, you know, this generation's Ta-Nehisi Coates, you know. But much, much more important is the work. The work is what matters. The work is the fight. You know what I mean? And in the times in my life when I have forgotten that, in the times in my career when I've forgotten that and gotten sucked into other things, it's always been bad. It's always trouble. So it's like, you know, you got to kind of go into a shell. Like, you got to put yourself into a box and just be here. And it's you and the work. And the world is out. It's very difficult to do, actually. And I'm not saying I always succeed at it, but ideally, and the world is out here, you know? And what I have to do is here. And I just have to, and this is like a daily struggle. I have to focus on this. I have to focus on this. This one thing has to get done. This is why I came. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't mean disregard your family, and because that can go bad, but I'm talking specifically in terms of what people are saying. You know, it's too much conversation. You gotta, you know, Emerson again, protect the sanctity of your own mind. You know what I mean? That's what's important, and you gotta allow your mind to do what your mind does. You know, and not, you know, have it filled with, you know, all sorts of other things that folks are saying. Mm-hmm.
And sir, this kind of builds off of the last question, because you talked about how writing is cathartic and how it's peaceful to be able to find a way that, or be able to express the way that you felt at that exact moment in particular. And so, but on the other hand, you're often aligned with speaking on behalf of a subset of our population or on behalf of a race of people. And so how do you kind of navigate through that, or do you ever feel that there's a danger in that?
Yeah, there's a lot of danger in it. I make it clear that I don't speak on behalf of 40 million people in this country. I do whatever I can to promote, you know, other writers and authors, you know, who I think, you know, could diversify that opinion. Yeah, I mean, I just make clear that I have never asked to be anybody's one voice at all.
Hi, sir. I have a question. Earlier you talked about you want to reach a satisfactory explanation. Do you feel that when you do that, you have to make a choice between making your work pretty or blunt? Because it's always very pretty. But is it poetic because it's honest, or do you have to decide to make it beautiful?
No, I think the bluntness is the beauty. I think that's it. I think once you know, it's like, you know, you're purifying something and you're trying to clear away all of the impurities. And once you get to the raw, pure thing, the humanness, the emotion that you're trying to get to, that is without fail beautiful. I haven't written untrue sentences that are beautiful. That's just me. I mean, I guess you could lie and lie beautifully. But I think, does that beauty stand the test of time? Does it call people back to look at it again? Does it make them, you know, see something in it the third and fourth and fifth time that they didn't see the first time? That's the level I'm trying to get to. But the battle, like when I'm looking for words, I'm not looking for words to make a sentence sound better. I'm looking for words that best reflect what I'm trying to say. So you got music in your head. It's the most beautiful music in the world to you. And you just want the rest of the world to hear that music. And you sit down to write to try to get that music out, right? And that, it's never quite as beautiful as what you hear in your head. But you're trying to get as close as you possibly can to that. And for me, there's like no separation between that notion of beauty, you know, and that notion of, you know, bluntness. You know, I think half the problem is that, you know, people aren't blunt enough. You know, that like if you look at bad writing, I mean, it's usually that the point is buried somewhere. You know what the sentence is trying to say, but it's all this jargon and other mess and extra words in there that are really blocking out what the sentence really, really wants to be. So I don't find the two things in opposition.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Coates, sir, during your time at Howard University, you mentioned that when you began your time or began writing as a journalist, that was kind of the key point to your exploration. For us as undergraduate students, what can we do to kind of begin, or who are trying to get involved with the journaling process? What are some strategies or advice you have for us?
Well, I'm bad at strategy. Y'all won't believe this, but, or maybe you will. You're so way ahead of where I was when I was your age. Life is so long. It's so long, and it was enough time for me to be a complete screw up. Just a total, at least, you know, by whatever, you know, societal measures were available. I mean, you have to understand, like, when I was doing that, I was like cutting class and then dropping out. Like, I was totally and completely disappointing my parents. I don't urge you guys to do any of that. But that's how I got here. Like, it was not a scripted. I came to college, I think when I came to Howard, I left college with a 2.3 GPA. In my junior year, I had failed 5 out of 7 classes. I'm just telling you where I'm coming from. My senior year, my dad told me I was gonna get out, or no offense, have to join the Army. I knew I wasn't as tough as any of you guys, so I wasn't going into the Army. So I worked my butt off and got up to a 2.3 GPA, did decent at SAT, got into college, right? I go into college, and I'm like cutting classes to go like read in the library. Like, that was the thing. I couldn't be like a normal screw up and go, you know, smoke weed or drink or chase girls or do whatever. Like, cut class and go do that. You know, I cut class to go to the library. But I was still cutting class, which bothered the hell out of everybody. You know, I did that for a few years. I knew as soon as I got on campus, I wasn't supposed to be in college. As much as I liked being at Howard, the environment, I knew I shouldn't be in anybody's classroom. You know, I couldn't sit still. I couldn't concentrate. Like my mind was like other places. I mean, I had this like brain that if I wasn't interested, I wasn't interested. But if I was the most interested person in the world. And I actually think it's like the key, like I think I haven't changed actually. I think it's like the key to my writing now. Whereas if I say I'm gonna do ABC, and 5 other people say I'm gonna do ABC, if I have one thing, it's the fact that I will keep going longer than them. I'm just like gonna be way, way more curious. I'm just gonna ask 50 more questions. I'm gonna like try to get it down to the smallest possible. And that was the sort of kid I was. That doesn't make for a good student though. That probably almost certainly does not make for a good cadet. But it shows you, I think, like sometimes like when you're young or you're in one world, the things that make you weak and the things that make you ill-equipped and inadequate, world changes. And then suddenly all those skills or that way you were that, you know, just was a complete and total, you know, disaster, like suddenly it becomes like, you know, the most important thing in the world, you know? So I guess what I'm trying to say is I got tremendously lucky. You know, where I'm from, kids like me, you know, they went to jail, they got killed, you know what I mean? Had kids at a really, really young age. I just, it was a mess, man. It was a total mess. I dropped out of college. After I dropped out of college, I think a year later, my son was born. You know what I mean? So I was in my early 20s with a kid. It was not a roadmap. I guess what I will say though, there's one bit of wisdom to be pulled out of this parade of folly. I did know what I wanted. I did know I wanted to write. Whole time I was clear on that. I was very intentional about that. It's why I was cutting class. I wasn't like, hey, let me wander into no, I want to do this. I want to do this, and you're not talking about this, so I don't, you know what I mean? And so once I got past probably the great detriment, and it was a great detriment of not having a college degree, once I got past that and got into a point where, you know, I had equalized everything out, which really didn't happen until I was in my early 30s, I think I had a level of intensity that a lot of my peers did not have. Because I wasn't just doing this because I was good at it, I was doing it because I thought it was the most important thing in the world. Whatever you do, I just feel like you should want to feel like that. I wish everybody felt about, I mean, this is utopian, but I wish everybody felt about their careers and their jobs like how I feel about writing. I love it. I love it. I don't want to live without it. I don't know what else I would do. There are other things I'm good at, but this is the thing that, you know, fills me with meaning. It's like this, my family and the few friends I have, and it's not much else, you know? But it's an intentional, directed life. And so when I think of myself as you guys' age, I had that, I just didn't have the ability to make it possible. I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know, you know, steps. You guys are, by definition, much more ordered, structured. You guys got it a lot more together than I did. So it's hard for me to advise you because the way it happened to me, you know, there was so much luck and chance and randomness in it. I do think that thing about intentionality is important though. I do think like knowing what you want to do and being very, very clear about it is important.
Sir, between writing for national magazines and giving lectures at colleges such as our own and publishing national books as well, do you have an impact you hope to have on your reader that you couldn't gain from just privately writing?
I hope I've clarified my little corner of the world. I hope people who are like me and who grew up like me and came from communities like mine are heartened and can feel as though they are not crazy. I think that's a lot. It sounds small, but I think it's quite a bit, because I think half the experience of living as we do is seeing the world one way and feeling like the world is like gaslighting you. You know, you see a guy, you know, running and like shot down on camera, right, by a police officer, and there are laws and there are orders and there's protocol for why that's okay. But in your heart, you know it's not okay. It's really, really not okay, but the entire architecture of the society is telling you, yes, it is, yes, it is, yes, it is, yes, it is. I hope the people that see those sorts of things, I hope the kids that live in communities like I lived in, you know, hyper-violent, yeah, constantly dangerous, where violence was just a constant force, and understand that the rest of the country, it's not that way. I hope they understand that they didn't do anything wrong. It's not their fault that it's that way. It's not something that they caused. If I could do that, that would be pretty big. That'd be pretty big.
Sir, most of your work has been involved writing from your own perspective and writing about your own story. How does that change when you start writing for Marvel and you have to now write for other characters, especially characters like Black Panther and Captain America, who are at the forefront of pop culture right now? How does that change your writing process?
It doesn't. I think all writers are always writing from their perspective. Some are more explicit about it, as you know, I am. You know, but they almost are. I mean, they inevitably are writing from their perspective. You know, if there's a difference in comic books, it's so like you take this latest example, right? Like let's go back. When I did Black Panther, it's like you have to do the math of who this guy is and then ask who you might be if you were in his shoes. But you can't just put yourself in his position without doing the math before that. The child is a specific guy who was raised, you know, with this notion of country above everything. And yet he has all of these individual pulls that keep taking him away from his country. He doesn't really want to be king, but he is by blood. And he would never in a million years forsake that, because it has meaning to him. So as the writer, you have to, and that's everything that was before me, right? So that's stuff that I did not write. That's just, you know, stuff that was there. So I come into this position and I know that, and you have to say, okay, so how do I find myself in this? What can I relate to in this? And I guess, like, if I'm honest, when I was writing Black Panther, for me, a lot of it was the fact of, well, Between the World and Me had come out at that point, and I had assumed a place in the world of literature that I never thought I would be at. And there were things that came with that I did not ask for and did not expect. So I actually thought a lot about that. But obviously I wrote it, you know, through the notion of, you know, this guy who was king. For Cap, it's like you got a guy who was the embodiment of the best of his country. Goes off to war, fights in the greatest war all Americans are proud of. Is frozen in the ocean, dug out in modern time, and has to make sense of this postmodern world. How does he deal with that? I mean, he's a guy who really, really, really believes in the dream. Like, unquestionably, doesn't necessarily always believe in the government, often actually opposes the government, but believes in the dream, deeply loyal, you know, to the idea of what America could be. And yet, over and over again, like, his country disappoints him. Again, I'm talking about what's written before I was. I mean, it's crazy, crazy stuff. Nixon at one point in Captain America's history, like, just organized this plot against him over and over again. And so he's repeatedly disappointed by his country, but he believes, deeply, deeply sincere. How you write that? How you find yourself in that? You know what I mean? What's the thing that, you grab onto? And I guess for me, I was like really attached to the idea of like devoting yourself to a cause. I don't think any cause is ultimately, an unalloyed good. I think that's, there's, search for purity in anything. And I mean, even, my own, even the cause I've devoted myself to is ultimately, a kind of naivete. But nonetheless, being devoted to a particular cause, even as the people who claim to uphold that cause disappoint you, that was like something I could get to. It was also like he's in this period right now where where the country no longer believes in him because of some things that happened before I got here again. And he has to regain that trust. He has to rebuild the trust that he had in the country. One of the characters, repeated him. They just say, you call yourself, Captain America, but what are you captain of? Your country's not with you. She derides him as captain of nothing. And he has to, find a way to reclaim that. I love that. I just have an innate attraction to that as a story. I don't. There's a level of truth that you get through argument, and then there's a level of truth that you can't really get to through argument, policy. What healthcare, tax cut, reparations, whatever. There's just a level of truth that you just can't get to with that you can only find in stories. And so for me, it's just tremendously exciting. I mean, it's still me, but obviously it's a different me. It's an aspect of me that I can't really represent, in the nonfiction world. It's an opportunity to ask myself how I would be if different things were true of my life, so it's exciting.
So we have time for one last question. Tyson, Lou, Danny, whoever you'd like to ask a question.
Mr. Coates, you've answered most of my questions over the course of this discussion, but there's one thing that I was hoping to get back to that you discussed earlier, and it's the idea that writing is cathartic. And recently some of us had the opportunity to go to 92Y and listen to the four quartets, Eliot's four quartets. And there's a line in that stands out to me, time does not heal, it preserves. And your writing has spoken to me, and I've attempted to chronicle some of my own experiences, and Dr. Hoppe has helped me through the process, but part of this has been also, as you said, sort of selfish. I've had the notion that if I can get these ideas, these experiences on paper, I won't have to bear as much a burden. But I'm wondering, in your experience, does the process of writing, does time heal, or are you still burdened with some of these experiences?
No, it doesn't heal, but it So there are two things. Like when you're black in this country, like I think about like somebody has done something to you. They've injured you. And so one level is the actual injury, right? But on the second level, the person that's done it to you, as I was saying earlier, refuses to admit that they've done anything. And in fact tells you either you're fine or you did it to yourself. The writing can't heal the first, but it can heal the second. It dismisses for me the idea that I have to listen to any of that or have any regard for it at all. That is freeing. Life is always hard. It's always been hard for any, if you look at the grand sweep of human history, it's never been, the greatest experience, relatively. You know what I mean? It's always been, we've always had shackles, burdens that we had to deal with. One can't wish oneself out of that. And being black in this country is just the latest iteration of that. You guys study the 30 Years War at all? Wow. This is a book by this woman. I'm not saying you should read it. but it's a great book. By this woman, C.V. Wedgwood, called The 30 Years' War. And it's all about one of the most underappreciated wars, as far as I'm concerned, in world history. I mean, yeah, it's like World War II before World War II, with no atomic bombs or modern, weaponry or anything. But the level of death is just incredible. I mean, just absolutely. And you read this and you wonder, what are they actually fighting over? They claim to be fighting over religion. It really doesn't look like they're actually fighting over religion. It is just a horrific level of violence. And it just reminds you that this is human history. This is what it is. Okay, so I can't fix that. If the burdens put on you for being labeled or being cast into a race in this country, if those things were taken away today, it'd be something else. It really would. Knowing that and understanding that, it allows me to make peace with my life. It allows me to, I wouldn't say be passive or not struggle any, but I understand. I understand in the grand scheme, like what I am and what's happening here. It's the lying that I think is tough. Just tell me what it is. Tell me, it's like you going to the doctor and you got cancer and they're telling you, they won't tell you that, listen, you only got 3 months. I'd like to know I got 3 months. Tell me. I would love to have much more. But tell me, give me an honest diagnosis. Don't, mess around. And so the writing allows me to get past the messing around. It allows me to accept the limitations of being human, and even as you accept, you struggle, but I think so much of this is just caught up in, no, you're seeing it wrong. Everything's great, everything's peppermint ice cream and cupcakes, and you're not seeing it. And that, to me, from the time I was like a child, that was always like the secondary burden that really, really just felt intolerable to me. Does that make sense?
Thank you. I think Gabrielle's going to follow up on that notion when you all have time with each other, because you had a question about that too. But we want to end now to give you time with the cadets alone. So thank you for your time. Thank you. And we have 3 gifts for you, because this is historic for us, and we're very grateful for that. So we want to just present you with those, and then the faculty will depart, and then we'll just have the cadets, and you have some minutes. So the first one, Lauren has this. This is a fantastic, life-changing book.
Are you giving me my own book? I don't have a copy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I've long wanted this. I'm so proud. Wow. Who wrote this?
We figured that would be hard to find, but what we've done is the cadets have annotated it with questions, responses, associations.
Oh, it's not my book. It's your book.
It's your book.
It's your book. I mean, by the annotations.
It's your book. It's our
Wow.
conversation with you. And so we want you to think of these folks here as your own West Point horde. Right?
All right.
We know
Okay.
the horde is out of on stop, so the horde. So that's the first thing. And then secondly, Gabrielle has for you a very modest volume of our own.
Okay.
Now, this is a slightly smaller print run than the first one. Just you, and then we've got one, Maxwell has got it. We're hoping that you'll sign the one that Maxwell has for you.
Sure.
But what we want to do, it kind of follows up on your Captain America the spiel, right? How do you find yourself in the dream? We asked these cadets to think about how they find themselves in the dream, given how you've challenged it, given their own, challenges that you've faced with it. And so they have brief responses and reflections on what it means to them to be here, who they are, and why they're still going to be here. So Kate is going to read the dedication of the book, and then we'll follow up with the last.
We dedicate this small volume to Ta-Nehisi Coates, whose every sentence calls on us to see more clearly and truly, models for us how to become more exacting, curious, principled thinkers and actors, and compels us to understand the urgency of these struggles. Thank you, sir.
Wow. All right. All right.
And then lastly, Lou can explain this better than I can, but he has a coin.
So we've got a long-standing tradition in the military that whenever we come in contact with someone who we respect and who has influenced us in some way, we give unto them a coin that bears part of our identity, and in doing that, we share part of us with you. So thank you, sir, for taking your time, and this is a sign of respect from us.
Wow. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.